Okay, today's tutorial is going to be real quick. This is going to be on how to create depth of field in your renders in Maya. And so what depth of field is it's a term used a lot in photography and film, and it refers to essentially having an area that's in focus and an area that's out of focus. And it's a really helpful resource if you have a character model or like one specific point of focus that you want your renders to focus on, and kind of move the background out of the foray, so to speak. And so really helpful for kind of having high-end kind of professional looking renders here, and it's a pretty quick trick here. So I have just some Platonic solids that I did an edit duplicate special on right there. I have a plane, and I'm going to create just a real basic render here. So I'll just do a physical sky dome light, just so we can have something real basic for lighting. And first up is I'll create a camera. So I'll go to create, and then down to camera right there, and then create a camera. And you see the camera shows up down there, and right now we're looking through the perspective, so I need to switch to panels, perspective, and camera so that I can look through that camera that I just created. So now my perspective is looking through that camera right there. And when adjusting the camera, I think the main thing that you might want to focus on here when you're setting it up is the focal length right here. So the focal length by default is 35 millimeters, and 35 millimeters is kind of like your standard wide angle view, helpful for film, things like that. So that's probably why they have that as the default. For portrait photography, generally speaking, rather than 35, it'll be anywhere from 50 to 85. And you can see there, it looks like it zooms in a little bit, but these different focal lengths, we'll see it as I'll stretch it way out. Let's do a focal length of 10. You can see, you notice how the perspective is exaggerated right here. So this can be used a lot in film, like Terry Gilliam uses like wide angle lenses. Films like Drive use ultra wide angle lenses to kind of get more of the scene, more of the environment. So if you're rendering like an internal environment like a room or something like that, there's a chance you might want to go with some kind of wide angle. 10 is way too wide, but maybe something like 20. 24 is a really common focal length in cameras right there. Remember, 35 is kind of like your standard film focal length. And then for portrait photography, generally speaking, anywhere between 50, 85 is often a pretty common one there. And you can see this, the space starts to shrink, but whatever object that you have in your foreground kind of starts to take center stage more and more, the more you move that focal length up to something like 85 there. So for this, I might just do something like 60. And we have our scene here. And so right now, if I were to render, I wouldn't have any depth of field, but I have a light in the scene, and yeah, a pretty basic situation here. Not sure why that Platonic solid is not rendering right now. Let me just delete it. Okay, it must be something with, oh, I got mixed up. It's the shadows right there. There's a little bit of an optical illusion right there with the lighting. So, I'm not going to spend much time focusing on the lighting here, because that's not really the main purpose of this tutorial here. I just wanted to show focal length real quick. And then additionally, I want to show how to apply depth of field here. And so to apply depth of field, it's important to know what you want to have in focus here. And with a camera in person, it's really easy to just kind of change your lens, and you can kind of find it real quick. In Maya, we have to render every time we see something, so that might take a while. And so instead of just manually adjusting it, the focal, the depth, the focus distance, the first thing I want to do is find the object that I want to have in focus right here. And so let's just say that this is my camera angle, and I want it to be this solid right here to be in focus, and most of the others to kind of get more and more out of focus the further away it gets from this one right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lock my camera, which is this button right here. And so now if I try to move my camera, it's locked in place. Sometimes something that can be helpful here is this is the resolution gate, and so this will kind of show you what's going to render and what's not within your scene right here. So that's this button right here. If you want to kind of, so the render will kind of crop off like that, so you can kind of see your composition before you lock your camera by using that button right there. Next up, you'll see up here I have what's called the heads-up display, and you can see right here I have the number of faces that are in the scene right now, the number of polygons, but also right here we have distance from camera. So whichever object I have selected, it shows me the distance in centimeters from the camera. So this one's 25 centimeters from the camera, this one's 15, this one's 48. And so the way you get this heads-up display is you go to display, show, oh, give me one sec here. It is, oh, I'm sorry. That was a brain fart there. So go to display, heads-up display, and then go down to, you can see you can turn on and off poly count. So if you want to see how many polygons are in your scene, that's right there. And in terms of seeing the distance from the camera, it's object details right here. So if I turn that off, you can see it goes away. And if I go to display, heads up display, and then object details, it turns back on. And so I want the focus distance to be 25.1. So that's just important information to have right there. But before I can do that, I need to turn on depth of field in my camera in order to get it in the render here. So I have my camera selected right here. And if we go down to depth of field, if I turn this on, this is, it's actually not going to do anything. It's just my being kind of dumb. This would turn on depth of field if you were using a legacy render, but we're using Arnold right now. So checking this on and off isn't going to do anything. So that's a common thing that trips people up for obvious reasons right there. So instead of going to the depth of field tab, go down to Arnold, and then go down, so under the Arnold tab, I am looking for, oh, here it is, enable depth of field, which is this little check mark right here. So it's Arnold, enable depth of field right there, and then directly underneath enable depth of field, you can see focus distance, and I want this one to be in focus, so it's 25 centimeters. So I'll go back and type in 25. And the aperture size is going to play into this here. So let's just see what this looks like if I were to render this. So not much has changed. And so what I need to do here is start kind of making some adjustments here to get this to show up. So with the aperture size, I'm going to increase the aperture size, and look what happens to the render as I increase the aperture size right there. So if you click enable depth of field and then you type in the focus distance and not much shows up in your render right at first, just remember that there's one more thing you need to change, which is the aperture size right here. And I'm not going to get too much into the the camera theory on why that makes a difference here, but you can see here that the lower the number, the more things that'll be in focus right here. So if I have the aperture size all the way down to 0, it's just almost everything's going to be in focus at that point. And then if I raise it way up, you can see that almost everything gets out of focus right there. So it depends on your scene, how big your scene is, right? This is a pretty small scene that I'm working with right now. So it'll just kind of depend on how large your objects are in terms of how big or small this number should be. The last thing I'll say about depth of field here is, just generally speaking, the way depth of field works is if your camera is really far away from a subject, it's a little harder to get kind of drastic depth of field. And if you get your camera close to a subject, kind of like sort of what I have here, then it's a little bit easier to get depth of field to show up within the render there. It's just kind of the nature of the way that depth of field works within a camera in real life as well as virtually, as we see here. So You can see here I need to kind of boost my render settings to get some of this green out, but this is essentially how you get depth of field in a render.